Hi, my name is Jenny Devonshire and welcome to the Pause2Perform Podcast, where we talk about all things relating to wellness, what you should take a pause for in your day to optimise your mental and physical health and perform at your peak. So welcome to the Pause2Perform Podcast with me, Jenny Devonshire, and this week I am joined by Niki Woods. Niki is a former HR manager turned perimenopause educator and coach of midlife professional women. She is a regular speaker for the CIPD, which is the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. Niki works with businesses to improve menopause awareness, education, and support for employers, managers, and colleagues. She also supports clients to improve their lifestyle, health, mindset, and confidence during perimenopause and beyond, with an integrated approach covering fitness, nutrition, mindset, and habits-based coaching. And on top of all of that, she is a member of the British Menopause Society. Niki has been featured several times in local media and podcasts, educating on menopause and health. She also runs a 1,400 member-free Facebook group, which is dedicated to supporting women in midlife. So welcome to the podcast, Niki.
Thank you very much.
So I thought you could start off, you just like letting the listeners know a little bit more about yourself, maybe your journey to where you are today and what it is you do now.
Thank you. So really, I mean, you covered most of it there. There's kind of two strands to what I do, and one is this working with businesses, so working to help businesses understand and their employees and managers understand the signs, symptoms, and what we can do practically to support colleagues going through perimenopause and menopause, both in terms of what individuals can do practically to support themselves with nutrition, fitness, etc., and then also with the more commonly known medical approaches. And then with my one-to-one personal clients, that's just a small aspect of what I do with them. We're focusing holistically and in a really integrated way on their nutrition, their kind of their mindset, their fitness, their general movement, because that's really, really important for midlife women as well. And how I came to basically transition careers is I'd kind of felt like I'd done all my years of HR, and there was something that I wanted to do that was kind of more solving positive problems and making a difference. And then I'd already started doing some of that, and then within my own experience, I had quite a significant issue with some perimenopause symptoms. Mine mainly actually are less related to the estrogen and progesterone, so as much as they are to testosterone, and my experience with very low testosterone and trying to get that replaced. And I quite often focus when I speak corporately and just generally about the role that testosterone can play and how much of a difference that can make for us. And also I speak quite a lot about vaginal and urinary symptoms and vaginal estrogen and how that can help, because I think those two aspects are less well known than the more typical systemic HRT. And so there's a lot of women who are still struggling with issues, but they don't know why, and it can make a massive difference. So I kind of focus quite a lot on that.
Okay, great. Do you want to, well, now because you're on that topic, did you want to explain a little bit more about those for the listeners?
About the testosterone first or the estrogen, which would you rather?
Whichever. Maybe start with the testosterone and we can move into the estrogen afterwards.
Okay. So for myself, I had already been given some estrogen and progesterone, but I didn't really feel that made any difference to what I was personally feeling. I was very tired, very achy physically, and I literally, even just to brush my hair or hold the hairdryer, I would have massive aching in my shoulders as if I'd done really heavy exercise when I hadn't. If I was to walk up the stairs, my legs would ache like I'd really been caning it in the gym. in terms of my own training, everything just felt like it was getting harder and harder and harder. And the ability to lift weights was coming down, but also my ability to recover was getting less. But then there was these other symptoms that I just needed more and more and more sleep, and I just was never recovered. And I got to the point, I actually was in a typical situation to a lot of women where I thought that I had this issue, but it took a very long time to get resolved because of how the prescribing of testosterone is very difficult to come by in this country. And so I had a very long period of time where I'd paid privately for a test, and I knew I was very low and getting worse and worse, but wasn't able to get my GP to help me with that, and was in a waiting list for the menopause clinic. And within that time, I was just getting more and more tired, to the point where I was sleeping more hours of the day than I was awake, but I still wasn't refreshed, and I became incredibly forgetful, to the point where I repeatedly locked myself out of my house. I would not feel safe to leave the room if I'd put something on the stove, because I would forget I'd done it, and I would either just be upstairs and smell burning, or I would have left the house and I'd come back to find smoke everywhere. I realized that, like now I'm waving my hands around, I wouldn't even be able to do that. I wouldn't have the energy to do that. Calls that I'd usually do standing up, I'd be sat down. I was so depleted of energy that any time that I felt like I needed to sit down. But then my cognitive ability got less and less and less, to the point where I would get confused counting to 10, which is ridiculous, because quite clearly we're normally quite good at things like that by the time we're adults. And I also driving became a massive challenge, because I didn't have the cognitive ability to drive my car and navigate my car at the same time. And journeys of just a couple of miles that I previously would have done, for 20 years, I've driven the same journey. I couldn't actually do it anymore without having sat nav, because I couldn't think of which junction I needed to turn at, and how to change gears and make sure I wasn't going to crash into anything. And so when I finally got the testosterone, within a matter of mere weeks, I could feel the difference. And I could start feeling like someone switched a bit of the light back on. I'm not saying I went from that level of impairment to being absolutely fine within 2 weeks, but I noticed a significant difference, both in terms of what my body felt like, but what my mind felt like, and just the general levels of fatigue felt like they were lifting within literally a couple of weeks.
That must have been absolutely terrifying for you. Did you, I've heard before people thinking that, it might be dementia and things like that. Was there anything like that running through your mind when you were experiencing that?
No, because I was so convinced that it was the testosterone. If I hadn't have known, and I have to say that it was due to the News and Health podcasts that I uncovered a lot of this information. And so as I started getting these physical feelings, I was pretty sure, and this level of fatigue, and obviously so it took me from the start of that and being convinced, it took probably, I was very lucky, it only took about 8 months to get to a point where I got some testosterone. Now, I was so when I became convinced that that was the answer to what the problems were, I then tried to speak to my doctors about it, and they were having none of it. I was so convinced I was right. However, I wanted to also double check a few other things they hadn't checked at the doctors. So I paid for some private blood tests, and the private blood tests then proved that I was correct. Then I went back to the DP, who were having none of it. And from that point where I knew I already had almost no testosterone in my system to when I finally got some, that was about 8 months. And so obviously I got significantly worse within those 8 months. But at that point I was also living abroad in a country where I couldn't get any, so I couldn't have done what I normally encourage people to do, which is kind of bypass the system and go private. So I knew what the problem was the whole way along. I just knew I needed to fix it. But obviously, trying to fight your own battles in that situation when you're barely functioning is very difficult. And I have to be honest, if I was in a job, I would have been off sick, performance managed, probably lost my job. If I had had children to care for, I don't know how I would have done it. But I wasn't scared. I was angry with what little energy I had left, because I understood why it was happening and what the problem was, and also what the solution was.
Yeah, I suppose that kind of really highlights the importance of education, doesn't it? It's like, that's why it's so important that we talk about these things, so people have that information. Because I mean, and also, like, obviously it sounds like you're quite strong in your in yourself, so you were able to kind of go and speak to the doctor like this. But I know a lot of people, they get sort of kind of worried about putting their opinions across, even if they don't believe in what the doctor says, or they just take it as like the doctor knows best. So great that you're here to talk to everyone.
This is something that is a real female issue, but a lot of medical professionals disagree about testosterone. But I've had so many clients who, maybe not to the level I've had, but who I've encouraged to either, if they're not getting anywhere with their doctor, go private or whatever, because it can actually make more difference in many cases than the systemic HRT that we normally talk about. And it can, I couldn't live my life, I couldn't work, and if I hadn't have managed to find a way around it, but me being my personality, I would have found a way around it. But my life wasn't worth living. And I don't say that lightly, because I had no life, because I was asleep all the time and I didn't have any brain power and I didn't have anything. At that point, it was suggested to me by a GP that some of how I felt so low needed antidepressants. And I was very clear, I didn't need antidepressants. The reason I felt rubbish was because I had no energy to do anything. It was, so the mood was being affected as a side effect of the symptom, and the cause of the symptom was the testosterone being so low.
Yeah, and I think I heard on another podcast actually that like our testosterone levels are actually higher than our estrogen. Is that right?
But also, whereas we say blood tests aren't really useful for understanding where our estrogen levels are, for example, where progesterone levels are, they are sometimes quite useful for testosterone. And so they can show what our serum testosterone levels are. And we don't want, testosterone normally falls very smoothly for women rather than bouncing around like estrogen does, and it's not cyclical like progesterone. So we don't want it too high either, because that can cause other issues. So obviously women with PCOS have too much testosterone relative to their estrogen and their progesterone. So it is quite important for a baseline testosterone level to be taken, and then after that, after about 3 months of treatment, for another testosterone blood test to be taken, so that we can see if the level that's being taken by the woman has put it to the okay level or too high. Now, for myself, I can kind of tell when my level's too high or too low now from my own personal kind of side effects. But again, each woman will probably be a bit different in that. So for testosterone, it is a bit different, that it does actually make a difference to have a blood test. It is an important thing to do.
And so do the NHS ever prescribe testosterone, or did you have to go private to get it?
So the NHS do prescribe it, but most clinical bodies won't let it be prescribed, an initiation of prescribing by a GP. Some GPs in some areas are allowed to, but many would still be reluctant to. So it means a referral to the menopause clinic, and they can initiate the prescribing. After 3 months of follow-up blood tests, they can hand back prescribing to the GP with an instruction for the GP to take over prescribing. Now, someone who wanted to skip that massive long wait, because it can be like a year wait, I kind of pulled a few strings with other areas of hospitals to get myself bumped up a bit. Otherwise, I would have been waiting longer as well. You can go privately, and then the private specialist can refer you back into your GP, and then the GP take over prescribing. Now, some GPs are still reluctant to, but they've basically, if you've been instructed by a specialist, you've got to do it. The issue with testosterone is it's not specifically licensed for the treatment of women. And the only licensed, off-license use that is mentioned is for low libido. You'll notice I didn't mention libido once. And the majority of people I know have had significant cognitive issues rather than libido, but I do know a lot of other women who have found it's made a massive difference to libido as well. So this is a further complication. Most menopause specialists now recognise that although we still haven't got the research there, but that is getting started, that anecdotally and within their practice, they do know that it can make a difference to a hell of a lot of other things other than libido. But that's like a further other issue that sometimes when women are talking to their GPs to try and get that referral, that can be another stumbling block. And then because there is no female preparation currently licensed in this country, it's not on the formulary. So the prepayment certificate doesn't cover it because it's not on the formulary as a menopause product for women. And then when we do get prescribed it, because it's in men's dosages, we have to titrate down, which means if you get a little sachet, you have to squeeze like an eighth of the sachet out a day, which is laughable, really. Another stumbling block that we need to overcome is if we were to get it through to being licensed by the MHRA, the select committee doesn't seem to be that bothered about getting testosterone licensed for women. And even if they were, it's currently taking about 500 days to get things licensed by the MHRA. So that's obviously like, a year and a half. So we're looking, nearly 2 years probably. We're looking a very long time before the situation is likely to change for women and testosterone. I don't know if in the meantime there's going to be any push, I doubt it, for GPs to be able to initiate prescribing more. There's very real fear amongst GPs about doing the wrong thing with prescribing testosterone because they consider it a male hormone. And there's also, that even if the GPs were to overcome that fear, we do know that most GPs don't really know what they're doing anyway. So they need a lot more support and a lot more education around what to, in HRT prescribing. So I think we've got a long way to come. But for me, I call it my Lazarus hormone. And I find that that's the one that I couldn't function without. I can function without estrogen. I can function without progesterone. I can't function without testosterone.
And that's like a very long process. Is there anything people can do for themselves with diet or anything, or does it have to be you have to take it?
So if you were just ever so slightly low, you can probably help yourself and you can help optimize. Strength training does actually boost both estrogen and testosterone. So strength training with weights, it's got so many wonderful, wonderful uses, but that is one of the things that it can help with. However, if you're someone like me and you just didn't have any in there, any left anymore, and you just weren't making it, then the only thing that's going to help is to actually have that hormone supplemented. We know that there is tons of evidence for eating a lower amount of processed food, a more real whole foods diet can help with a multitude of your inflammation's less, your digestion's going to be better, your sleep's going to be better. There is evidence around having fewer general symptoms of perimenopause, having a bit of an easier time of it. Likewise, if you move enough, if you drink enough water, if you manage your stress, if you do some resistance training. However, there becomes a point for some of us that you can be doing all that right and you still need some help externally, and there's nothing else that's going to be around it. For myself, I don't know why all my symptoms seem to be mostly related to a couple of very specific issues. But I suspect it was getting worse for years and years and years before it got so bad. But this is, like you said earlier, that why we need to be talking about it, because otherwise someone just wouldn't know.
And I think, like, especially women, you kind of like just ignore things. You're expected to put up with things, and it's so like pain and things. I just like it just reminded me. My friend had an IUD put in, and she said it was like really, really painful. Like, and I think she'd had children, so she had like complications, what have you. And she said it was like too painful. And they go, "Oh, we can put anaesthetic on it." It's like, why don't we do that as the norm? Like, but you're expected to kind of put up with a certain level of pain, and it's only when it's too much for you to bear that they then give you an anaesthetic, which was just on a solution-based one, rather than, it's not an injection or anything. And you just think, why is that not the standard? Why do we have to suffer? And it's just like, it just makes me really angry.
And this is the thing, women typically have their pain dismissed a lot more than men do. We know there's the research about heart attacks and how a woman is less likely to receive the quick treatment and survive a heart attack. That because women that we have slightly different symptoms when we are having a heart attack. So the kind of that's what people think of isn't as similar for women's symptoms of a heart attack. So it's less immediately recognised as well. But this is, when we're talking about period pain, when we're talking about vaginal and urinary issues, obviously sometimes you're not quite sure what's going on for a few months, but women's pain is so much dismissed. And likewise, a lot of the symptoms that we get during perimenopause can really mirror things like fibromyalgia. And women are more likely to get chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and that sort of autoimmune stuff going on anyway. And sometimes we're not then sure which it is, but a medical professional might not even be sure which it is. But just to not take it seriously is part of a more institutionalized issue. And I get massive joint stiffness compared to what I did when I was younger. And that, unknown to me, was one of my first perimenopause symptoms, was moving like an old lady. I actually found that collagen massively helped me for that and gave me my mobility back. But again, that's by talking to people and my own research and talking to the right people, rather than speaking to medical professionals about that. And they would probably think I was, just talking about anecdote. And so we have these two real struggles where we've got a certain part of the medical system who's saying, things like women don't need testosterone and you don't need X, Y, Z, and you're making a big fuss about nothing. Then you've got some real charlatans who are trying to sell all sorts of dodgy stuff. And then you've got this bit in the middle where there's real quality information, and some of it's slowly getting backed up by research, but there's a lot of research still needs doing. And for example, with the role of resistance training, that's only just now the research starting to get done, because loads of researchers are men, and also you need to get funding for research, and no one's really been bothered before to see if we can make women's lives better and healthier. And actually it does have an economic benefit, but people don't seem to realise that until
but there's all the women sort of being forced out of the workplace. Like, you obviously couldn't have worked when you were in that state, so when you're having to, like, the turnover, having to get people who've got this the skills that's taken years to get. I think it's very short-sighted, and I really hope that things change going forward.
And the thing is that some of it is because we simply didn't know. So, for example, when I look back at certain cases that I dealt with when I worked in HR, I think if I knew then what I know now, we would have had completely different conversations and potentially different health outcomes for those women. But at that time, those women didn't know that these things were related to perimenopause. And occupational health clearly didn't know, because occupational health referrals didn't result in any mention of that sort of thing. But now I can quite clearly say, knowing what I know, that those particular cases, I do suspect, were massively related to the change in those women's hormones. And even if they had maybe not been able to go on HRT, or chosen not to go on HRT, not being able to access HRT, there still could have been things that could have been done. But also just knowing that that was the case would make a massive difference. And this is why, again, like I talk so much about the vaginal estrogen, for example, because again, we don't have that common knowledge that even if you were to be on systemic estrogen, you might need additional estrogen in the vagina area, and that can massively take away vaginal symptoms, potentially dryness, etc., but also strange spasms and all sorts of unpleasant sensations that we can feel down there, but also that it can massively affect the urinary system. So we've got women who are massively suffering with what they think is cystitis. And then they'll go to their GP, they'll potentially get given antibiotics they don't need, which we know is an issue anyway, but it won't even help. Or they'll get given they'll do a urine sample and it'll come back and it'll be like, well, you haven't got cystitis. So eventually then they'll either just end up putting up with it and being miserable, or they'll get diagnosed with interstitial cystitis, when actually all they need is more vaginal estrogen in the form of a cream or a pessary or a ring that will then get into the entire of the genitourinary system. And it's the lack of estrogen in that area that's giving the potential small amount of incontinence, urinary urgency, the pain, the bloating, etc. And again, not only is that a woman's health issue, that's a women in business issue. Because if you feel like that, you're not going to be a great employee, because you're either going to be off sick or you're going to be in so much pain you can't focus and function.
Yeah, it's like one of my clients, actually, she had like the thinning of the skin in that area, which I think is quite common. And the doctor prescribed steroid cream. And I was like, but steroid cream thins the skin, doesn't it? So I was like, that sounds like a really strange approach. And I think she was later on prescribed like an estrogen gel. But yeah, it just goes to show that the knowledge isn't necessarily there. And so that's why, again, it's so important for us to talk about these things, so that if people are listening, they'll be like, oh, I've got that. Maybe I should speak to the doctor. So do you want to maybe go into a little bit more detail about that?
I think in terms of what the symptoms can be, there's dryness, but this is where it gets quite confusing. You can be wet and dry at the same time. So you could have drying of the skin, and that could be, it can feel a bit like having thrush, either on the inside or the outside. But you could still feel like you do have some vaginal discharge, for example. So this is the thing, that people might not understand that their skin is drier because they still think that they are wet.
Right.
So you can have that. You can have one of my super symptoms, which is completely unpleasant, is I would wake up in the morning, really early in the morning. The thing that would wake me up would be like this stabbing electric shock pain in my vagina.
That doesn't sound very pleasant.
And that was a symptom of low estrogen down there. And that's how my symptom was displaying itself. And I talk quite a lot about that symptom, because most people aren't talking about that symptom, but I know a lot of people, since I've said that and said it's really difficult to explain what it feels like, they're like, yeah, but I have that, so I know what you mean. There's the more general dryness, lack of elasticity, etc. Some people find that they, as I said, feel like they have either a urinary urgency, or they feel like they've got a urine infection. Your connection with your pelvic floor can be less because you've got so few hormones down there. It's like the signals aren't getting through.
Even why, like, if you haven't had children, you can still have the kind of urinary incontinence.
Yeah, and stress incontinence, which is when you cough and a little bit leaks. Sometimes you can feel very bloated, but it's quite obviously further down. It's not in your digestive system, it's in your urinary system. And all of these things can be related to needing more specific estrogen in that area. Now, the thing is that there's a lot of women who can't take systemic HRT because of, for example, breast cancer. They can still safely take the vaginal estrogen. And so for those women, they might be suffering and think they can't take anything in that area that is an estrogen-based product, and they actually can, because there is that local estrogen is still safe to take. Now, that's prescribed by the doctor. If you're over 50 and you are postmenopausal, you can buy one of the creams over the counter as well. If it's prescribed by the doctor, it is on the prepayment certificate as well. So you can get it with that one prescription charge in the year. They normally give it as either a pessary or a cream. There is a ring as well. There is some people who don't get on so well with it because they feel like it gives a bit of a burning sensation or something. So again, it doesn't work for everyone, but it can be absolutely transformative for people who, even if they're already on the estrogen systemically, it can completely change things for them.
So why is it that if you're over 50 you can buy it? It's because they think that your hormones are already kind of like balanced out so it won't affect it, or is it just a strange kind of thing that they've set up?
I don't know. I suspect it's because the average age of menopause is 51, and so they've decided, well, if someone's over a certain age, then we'll assume that if they think they need it, they probably are right. Whereas if it's someone who's younger, we want to investigate to see if it's something else instead. So, for example, if you were 40 and you were experiencing those symptoms, they probably want to do a few tests to see if you did have an infection of any form. So, I mean, I know people who've had these symptoms and they've had every test under the sun, including every STI test under the sun, because they've thought that, you know, what on earth is causing these symptoms, and it's simply needing the estrogen. So yeah, I think it's just that the MHRA or whoever made that decision felt like if you're above 50, we'll assume that if you think you need it, you probably do. If you're below, we want to have a further conversation.
And is there like an upper limit that you can take this? Is that could you take it, like use it for forever, or is it like you can use it forever? Okay. And what about HRT?
So, well, with just to say though, with the vaginal estrogen, I've had conversations with people, and I've heard other people talk about it on podcasts, where it's made a massive difference to very elderly ladies, because who were, you know, imagine being an 85-year-old woman with dementia, permanently feeling like you had an STI or a urinary infection, and you're sat all day in agony and feeling like you need the loo. So for some of those women to actually have that put into their body can massively, massively, massively change their experience of their entire life. Because you know, if you've had cystitis or something, it's not pleasant, and that's what it feels like all day, every day.
But it can really also reassuring.
But it can help with pelvic floor control as well, which obviously is something that as people get older they find more difficult anyway.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's like whenever I sort of think about the menopause, I always get really like sort of worried about it. But like just talking to you and realizing that the things that can be done to sort of help you through it, it's like making me feel much better about it. So thank you from me, and I'm sure other people will feel the same. So kind of back to the HRT. Is there an upper limit to? Because I've always heard that you can only take it for a certain amount of time, and I know things are constantly changing. So is that still true, or can you again keep continuing to take it?
There's differences of opinion on this depending on which specialist or practitioner you'd speak to, or whether you spoke to the British Menopause Society. So one of the main things is we always used to think take it for a small amount of time and then stop, and that doesn't seem to be the case now. There seems to be more of an issue with certain risks for certain cancers if you are significantly postmenopausal when you start.
Oh.
So, for example, when we think of that Women's Health Initiative study that caused all the fear, one of the issues with that, the main issue with that, was that the women they were quite significantly postmenopausal when they were started on the HRT, and that's a very different risk profile than if you started earlier. In terms of I very strongly feel like there's not really a one size fits all. There's some common principles, but then within that you've got the individual woman, and we should be treating each individual woman as an individual within this. And so for someone, they might feel they only need support during a specific period of time, and then for others, it may be that it's suitable for longer. And we don't have enough longitudinal research again about the balance of whether it is more, bone, brain, cardioprotective to remain on it forever. I think that there's research that can suggest that, but then there's other research that can say maybe it's not necessary. And it actually, I feel like the jury's still out, depending on who you speak to. There's some people who are very vocal saying we all need to stay on it forever for our brain health and our bone health. And then there's others that say, well, actually, I'm not sure that evidence does say that. And I wouldn't like to, I feel like I'm more comfortable saying the jury's still out. We can hedge our bets one way or the other than saying an absolute, because I don't feel like I know enough about all the research to say that.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Peter Attier the other day, and they were touching on hormones, and he was saying like the way they do it is like they test the hormones before they kind of start having any symptoms, and if they start to notice a drop, then they'll start talking about like HRT before it's even got to that point. And obviously our system is very much not like that, but then they've got the private system. But I mean, hopefully maybe one day. But I did also read somewhere or heard someone say that ideally you want to get your hormones checked when you're sort of in your 30s to see what's normal for you, because obviously we're all very different. So if you know what your levels should be, then you can kind of match it with HRT when you get to that point. So yeah, it'd be great if everyone had access to that.
I said that a really similar thing actually at something I was speaking at recently, and it was a lot of younger women in the room, and I said almost exactly that if you want to understand more about your body now, well, firstly, start paying attention to it. But secondly, I personally would say get some baseline readings. And I would say get 2 6 weeks apart, because that way you'll probably have hit both times in your cycle. So if you get one in your luteal phase, one in your follicular phase, then hopefully we'll know where all your levels are. Now, that's not to say that we automatically now know what to do, because our hormones can bounce around so dramatically anyway, because, if you've got really bad sleep, if you change your nutrition, if you're under a period of high stress, but at least you've got some form of a baseline to know where you personally were. And then if it were to be that you had some tests later, you'd know whether there was any difference. But a lot of this, do blood tests to tell if you're in perimenopause or menopause. Like the nice guidelines say, that over 45 diagnosed on symptoms alone, between 40 and 45, they may be useful, but they may not. And it's just the under 40 that then they also say do their 6 weeks apart tests for women under 40. And it is 1 in 100 will experience what's called premature ovarian insufficiency, which is experiencing menopause that early. So basically under 40. So yeah, I think it's worth doing those tests because knowledge is power.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've touched a lot on the kind of like the medical route, which has been great, and I hope that people have learned some things that they didn't already know, and it's given that vital knowledge. I thought we could just go into like the things that people can do in more detail to sort of help themselves, either before they get into perimenopause, like just generally, so sort of the lifestyle factors. So you've kind of touched on diet, so obviously avoiding processed food. Is there anything else you'd like to add around that?
Yeah. So most women don't eat enough protein. They eat a lot of fairly highly processed carbs and some unhealthy fats and not that much protein. And as women, we do need to eat more protein generally. It's great to support our health, our hormones, etc. But it's also great to support, along with exercise, resistance training, to support us retaining and building muscle. And why that's really important is because that protects our skeleton, but it also means that we have better blood sugar control as well, better carbohydrate handling. Now, as we get older, our ability to break down protein in both men and women gets less. So actually you get less benefit from the same amount of protein. So anyone who, as they're getting older, would do well to make sure that they're getting enough anyway. So eating more protein. There's also loads of research about omega-3 fatty acids and how that is beneficial for general health and for perimenopausal health. Obviously, we do need to bear in mind kind of the overall balance of calories when we're looking at healthy fats, etc. Because if you do eat too many calories, then you might end up larger with higher body fat than you want. We want to make sure that we've got lots of fibre in our diet. Fibre is fantastic, not just because it keeps you full for longer and keeps your gut moving through, but also because it helps take out the things that we want to get out of our body as well. And we know that our gut health has a massive impact on our hormonal health and our mood as well. And we also want to make sure, dietary-wise, that we are eating more complex carbs rather than simple carbs. So we've got simpler sugars, better blood sugar management. And also on top of that, making sure that we're hydrated. Really, that is nutrition as well, having enough water. I personally think that I feel better hydrated when I have spring water as opposed to tap water, because I'm getting the micronutrients in there as well then, which does help me feel more hydrated, and it means that I'm just making sure that I've got that correct kind of blood balance. Other than that, it's just the obvious of don't eat a massively processed diet. We know it affects our mood. We know it affects our hunger levels. There's research to say that if you eat, there was some research where people were in a free living environment, but within a metabolic ward, which means everything they ate and drank was measured and supervised, but they could do what they wanted within that ward. And they had a group of people who for 1 week were eating a whole food, minimally processed diet, and a group of people who were eating a very highly processed diet. And then they did a week, and then they swapped around to the other week. And they could eat as much as they wanted, but it was either massively processed or not. Each group, within the week where they were eating the massively processed food, just ended up eating 500 extra calories a day simply because they felt less full or whatever. And that obviously translated into weight gain, and it translated into how they felt. So that's a really, really massive example of how changing the quality of your food can actually change how you feel, but what your body actually looks like, what your body weighs. So that's massive. Caffeine and alcohol, those are also big ones for us as perimenopausal women, we lose the ability to break down alcohol as well, which is why all of a sudden we don't seem to be coping as well with it. And caffeine, if your system's already stressed, well, don't put another stressor and another uber stimulant in it. It can massively affect sleep. It's got a very long half-life, so if you had some in the morning, in the nighttime there's still a small amount, but we've got these women who are having this like at 4 a.m. Well, having some coffee earlier in the day is not helping with that. And then my own anecdotal experience is if I have caffeine, I have far worse bloating pre-period, I have heavier periods, I just have a worse time of it. So I think take it completely out if you can. Those are probably the nutrition side of things.
Yeah, it's funny you say about like the processed food. One of my male clients is doing like the Whole30, which is basically cutting out the processed food. If it's like boils down to it, and he's all without like counting calories or anything, he's lost weight, obviously feels better. And I always say like if you are eating like whole foods, getting enough protein and stuff, it's actually quite hard to overeat because you're full. Whereas like if you eat rubbish, then it's so easy. Like if you think about how many calories are in that, and you could eat, or crisps, you could eat a massive bag of crisps, it won't touch the sides. Whereas if you eat like a load of broccoli, then you feel full for absolutely ages. So yeah, good tips on that one.
And that's just made me think of something that's really, really valuable to say as well, which is snacking is a major issue. Firstly, in terms of blood sugar control, but also because those snacks are the things like the crisps, the chocolate, etc., that are really highly calorific. And say you have, a few biscuits, a bit of chocolate, whatever, they can add up through the day. Most times when I look at someone's food diary, the snacks add up to far more than a massive meal.
Oh, absolutely.
And we've got people feeling like they are struggling with their weight and that they're not eating very much. It's because they're eating poverty calories during the meals, and then they're eating all these snacks that aren't filling them up, aren't making them feel healthy, and are actually massive in calories, and they're not healthy, good calories. If you eat things that are higher in protein and fibre, they're harder for your body to break down. So you're actually ending up with less calories going into your body from them because you've had to work harder to break them down. Whereas eating, a Kit Kat, that's dead easy for your body to break down.
Yeah, and you're ready for another one. So I thought, like there's obviously the diet leads into supplements. So you talked about collagen, which I also take and I think is great. I started taking creatine a while ago now, but I really noticed it helped my recovery. So are there any other sort of supplements you would recommend for anyone with going through like perimenopause?
I think the major one for myself is definitely the collagen. Creatine can help with kind of explosive power and strength. The other thing that I would say, a very good female-specific multivitamin, just to make sure that everything's okay. Vitamin D, most people are deficient in that, but take it with K2 as well, because that means that you are absorbing it into your bones rather than having it circulating in your blood, which therefore means your calcium will circulate more in your blood. And then really, I think in terms of a lot of supplements, there's lots of things there's not great evidence for in terms of how they can help with menopausal symptoms. So there's an awful lot of menopause-specific supplements that are out there at the moment. There's not that much evidence. If you go on something like examine.com, some people find there are things that do help. I personally don't take any of them, other than ashwagandha. So ashwagandha is an adaptogenic herb that can really help if you're feeling high stress. Take it at bedtime. And then magnesium, likewise, that can really help with sleep, also with things like restless legs. Some people with both vitamin D and with magnesium find that putting it on in a skin absorption method is more effective. Can feel a bit tingly to start with your magnesium, but I think that's my list of supplements done basically.
Yeah, and I think I read I don't know if it was accurate or not, but they were saying that with restless leg syndrome, there was some link between iron, but I don't know if that's absolutely accurate. So you might want to research that. I don't know if you've heard about that link.
No, I've heard stuff about magnesium, but not about iron. Just having a good full blood count level done is going to tell you quite a lot. And I mean, one of the things about that is to make sure that you're not right at the bottom of where they're recommended, because that's not optimal. You want to be somewhere a bit higher up, just because we want to be not just functioning, we want to be thriving. I think one of your biggest supplements is sleep, really. It's not a supplement, but it is, it is going to make everything in life work better, having sufficient good quality sleep, and also movement during the day. That's going to help with your sleep. Getting some daylight, moving enough, is going to help with weight management, etc. I consider them as important as any supplement you might actually physically take in.
Yeah, I was actually going to come up to sleep next, because I know that some people, when they're sort of in perimenopause, sleep can be a problem. Is there anything, apart from exercise and magnesium, what else do you recommend to sort of improve sleep?
So earlier in the day, get out, get some daylight, get some movement, make sure you move enough, because if you haven't moved enough, then your body's not going to feel like everything's working right, and it's not going to have as much of a need for rest. You're going to feel drained, but you're not going to sleep as well. Then I'm a massive fan of blue light blocking glasses. I think they're absolutely transformative. So as soon as it gets to kind of, some people will say dusk, but I'll put them on past a certain point in summer as well. In winter, obviously, I'll put them on a bit earlier, as soon as night's fallen. But in summer, I'll probably put them on for about 7:30 anyway. And basically, you stop having all your big bright lights on, have your lower lights on, so that you've got less blue light coming in, which is going to not disrupt your melatonin, which is what's telling your body to go to sleep. All devices I have, they go onto blue light blocking. They're either on that all day or past about 7 o'clock at night. A really good bedtime routine, so no stimulants in terms of caffeine after midday, or preferably not at all. Alcohol, it's actually a sedative, but it's not going to give you proper sleep, and then later it's going to disrupt your sleep. I think you need to think in terms of stimulants, in terms of, what you're consuming media-wise as well. So don't be staring at your phone, don't be listening to really buoyant music, don't be looking or really stressful TV programs about war and death and torture. Likewise, think about what you're reading when you go to bed. Going to bed at a set time, getting up at a set time if possible. Making sure that you've not got any light in the room. That's going to make a massive difference. Making sure it's not too hot, not too cold. And I think that's probably it, actually.
Yeah, I think that's pretty comprehensive. And so I don't know if we've already kind of covered it, but obviously people sort of hot flushes and night sweats are linked with sort of perimenopause. Is there anything people can do in addition to what we've already talked about to kind of help mitigate that?
So there is some research about nutrition quality affecting perimenopausal symptoms. So again, getting better nutrition. But then there's not much research on exercise and perimenopause. There's more coming out now. There's a few pieces of research that do seem to indicate that working up an exercise-related sweat can reduce the symptoms of hot flushes and night sweats. So there's only 3 pieces of research that are around at the moment. One of them was about, and they were all in post-menopausal women. So women who'd already gone through the menopause but were still getting hot flushes and night sweats.
Oh, wow.
One of them was about cardio and getting a big sweat during cardio. And for them, there was a difference. And I confess, I can't remember which way round these 2 studies were, in terms of which one was that it gave them fewer and which one gave them, in fact, it was the resistance. There was one with resistance training, which is weights. With them, after 15 weeks, the number of moderate to severe hot flushes had halved. So they were doing 3 weight training sessions a week. And after 15 weeks, these postmenopausal women, their number of hot flushes went from 7 point something to 4 point something. So it's basically halved. The other group was a exercise cardio group, And that was that their hot flushes, they did 3 times a week, between 3 times a week and 5 times a week. And their hot flushes were reduced in intensity. So it seems like resistance training can make you have fewer hot flushes, according to that study. Cardio can make them less intense. There was one other study, but it was really complicated, and they did all sorts of confusing things, like adding in fish oil to some and not to others, adding in yoga, whatever. And for those, it didn't make any difference in 12 weeks doing bike, treadmill, or cross trainer. However, it did improve insomnia symptoms, sleep quality, depressive symptoms. So basically, there's 2 pieces of research that show that you can reduce your hot flushes and night sweats by doing exercise, and one study that says it didn't make that much difference on that, but it improved a load of other stuff.
Yeah.
The message is it makes you feel better.
Yeah. Yeah, well, for so many reasons. So I know that obviously osteoporosis and cardiac health are linked with menopause. I'm interested to know, like, how cardiovascular health is influenced by menopause, but also what can people do? I guess again, it's like maybe exercise, but is there anything? What can people do to kind of again mitigate the impact of these things?
So our heart health can be improved by, again, omega-3 fatty acids seem to play a positive role. Making sure that we have that our cholesterol levels aren't outside of the recommended range. In terms of, I think that if you are fairly active in just like movement rather than formal exercise, that goes a massive long way to having good heart health. And obviously walking, some of it fast, some of it slow, but generally people who are more active have better heart health. But then on top of that, I think that there is a clear role for actual cardio being protective for heart health. I think that someone who's truly fit in the health sense of it can lift some weights, but they can also operate at many different heart levels. Now that's great for managing stress as well, but lots of long distance cardio isn't great for perimenopausal and postmenopausal women. So, just having sign of some quick bursts of higher intensity, I would personally say that I recommend to people, if you could fit in maybe something of moderate intensity, 30 minutes, 1 or 2 times a week with your 3 weight training sessions, and then if you can fit in some kind of, like bike sprints or hill sprints or something like that, then you're covering all bases, because you've got your strength covered, you're keeping your heart rate at a moderately high level for an extended period of time. But also if you did quite an intense walk up a big hill during the week or something, weekend, that would cover that. And then you've got the ability to go up to a very high heart rate and recover and come down, go up to a very high heart rate, recover and come down. And so I think with that, you've got all your bases covered, and that could just take 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been exercising for a long time, and it's just part of my life. But every bit you read about it, there doesn't seem to be any downside. Obviously, some people hate it, so that could be a downside. But you can find something that you enjoy, like go dancing or just cleaning the house. If you do it rigorously enough, then you can get your heart rate up just doing that, can't you? So bring it into your daily life.
And that's the thing that we need to think about, redefining exercise as activity. Yeah, there is a real benefit to a structured progressive resistance training program. But if I had a choice between someone not doing that and doing nothing, or not doing that and being active, enjoying, all sorts of activities that are still giving them some weight bearing, that are still actually challenging them, well, that's brilliant, because we're still keeping people active. And the real problem is people who aren't doing any activity at all. So sometimes it's about redefining what exercise and activity is as well, because we've got to fight to retain our muscle, and we've got to fight to retain our cardiovascular health. And the sooner we do it, the better. And if we keep going, then it's a lot better than trying to regain it, because that's a real struggle. And for us as women, even as a feminist issue, we don't want to have to ask for help to undo a jar, or to not be able to carry our own luggage up the stairs at the airport. So as much as anything else, it's about being a strong, independent woman, as well as our health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a question to ask, because someone specifically asked me to ask you. So she says, so she's on HRT, and when she's in the progesterone phase, she feels like she's in a rage, and she wanted to know if that was normal. So is that normal? And if not, what do you think might be going on?
So for many women, progesterone is the calming hormone. So it's really strange, because there's many women who find that phase is they feel calmer, they sleep better, for example. But then there's other women who don't get on well with progesterone. For some women, changing the type of progesterone can change that. So, for example, the oestrogen is very identical to what our bodies would naturally produce, and so should be tolerated better. But then the type of progesterone in the Mirena coil is more synthetic. So some people will have problems with the coil that won't have problems with the oestrogen for that reason, because they're slightly different molecules. But it may be that someone might have it the other way around. PMDD, which is premenstrual, I'm not going to call it, I'm going to get it wrong now. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder is where women are very negatively affected in the progesterone phase. And so for women who have previously had really bad PMT symptoms, that might be what that's about. And so then if you put the progesterone in, that's mimicking that.
Right.
So a lot of women with PMDD don't get on very well with the progesterone for that reason. So it could be that. Now, magnesium, again, is meant to be quite helpful for many women, but also there's issues with, and this would take hours to go onto a whole new tangent. Reducing histamine can help. Now, histamine, obviously we think of that in terms of allergies, antihistamines, etc. But it does sometimes have a role to play in our mood as well, and in our inflammation. So in terms of reducing histamine levels, some people find alcohol to really not very helpful, but some people will find that certain histamine-inducing foods that make them feel worse as well. But again, that's quite unique to each person, so you have to do a bit of a experiment. But it might be worth her looking up that as well. But it could be that if she felt like she had a very, very bad PMS previously, that she is someone with PMDD, and that's why it's causing her such an issue.
That's great. I should be very happy to hear an answer to that question.
Yeah. It also may be, though, that because obviously we do want women to take the progesterone to balance out the estrogen and to protect the womb. But for some women who can't tolerate it orally, there is the option to put it vaginally instead.
Interesting.
So that's worth looking into as well.
Okay. I will let her know. Well, she'll listen to this and then she will hear it directly from you. I have one last question that I ask everyone, but is there anything else you would like to add before I ask it?
I think I added everything extra earlier on. So
I think we've covered a lot, which is great. So my last question is I ask everyone, is what's one thing that you recommend people take a pause for in their day to improve their mental and physical health and optimize their performance?
Just go for a walk outside.
Yeah.
It's probably not very surprising that I've said that. I like listening to podcasts, but I also think there's a real role sometimes for being in silence. We're not very good at that anymore. So turn your phone off, go for a walk outside in nature if possible. It's fabulous for your health, but it's also just lets you calm down and have that, and use that as your personal time to just reset a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I have started, because I would normally listen to a podcast, but I have recently been going and just letting my mind wander, because you don't really allow yourself that space necessarily. And it's not like when you're trying to meditate, you're trying to like still your mind. It's like literally just let all the thoughts come in, and just being outside just instantly makes you feel better. And now we're actually getting a summer, it's the perfect time to do it. So
It is.
yeah.
The human brain and the human eyes weren't meant to just see flat lines and screens. So it's massively calming. There's loads of evidence of how it's so positive for mood, for mental health. So it's not just great for our physical health, it's great for our mental health, but it's also going to help some of those things that, as many perimenopausal women are struggling with, it's just a win-win.
Excellent advice. So before we wrap up, where can people find you if they want to work with you? What's the best kind of channels? I will link to these in the show notes so they can.
Most active probably on LinkedIn. So I'm Niki Woods on LinkedIn, Niki with 1K. So that's where you can see my thoughts on all sorts of things to do with menopause, perimenopause, what's going on in the space, health, fitness, mindset, etc. So obviously people in the business space are probably more likely to use LinkedIn as well. I am also on Facebook and on Instagram, Personal Fitness Facilitated, or you can just look for Niki Woods and I should come up as well. And then my website's nikiwoods.com.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. I've learned a lot, so I'm sure everyone listening will do as well. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge.
Thank you so much. And my Facebook group, my free Facebook group is Your Best Midlife, if anyone wanted to come along and get some more questions answered in there as well.
You've been listening to the Pause2Perform podcast with me, Jenny Devonshire. If you enjoyed this show, I'd really appreciate it if you could rate, review and subscribe. This helps other people find it, and hopefully I can help more people to improve their mental and physical health and optimise their performance.